August 29, 1944. 0340 hours. Somewhere en route Nationale 13 between Alençon and Chartres, France. Private First Class. James Jimmy Roucard gripped the steering wheel of his GMC-2. 5-ton truck so hard his knuckles had gone white 3 hours ago. The speedometer needle bounced between 35 and 45 kilometers per hour, exactly where it had been since he left the dump at Saint-Lô 19 hours earlier. His eyelids felt like sandpaper. The jerry cans of gasoline stacked 8 feet high behind him sloshed and clanked with every pothole. One spark, just one spark from a blown tire scraping asphalt, and Jimmy would become a fireball visible from Paris. He wasn't alone. Through the pre-dawn darkness, he could see tail lights stretching ahead and headlights behind, an unbroken convoy of trucks that disappeared into the black horizon in both directions. Somewhere in this mechanical snake were 6 Zeusozeron vehicles, all driving the same loop, all hauling the same desperate cargo forward. The U.S. Third Army was 400 kilometers ahead, grinding toward the German border, and they were running dry. Before we continue with Jimmy Roucard's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Route Nationale 13, August 1944, where Jimmy Roucard was about to complete his third straight 20-hour shift without real sleep. Jimmy Roucard was 22 years old. He'd grown up in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where his father ran a small trucking company hauling cotton and timber. Jimmy had been driving since he was 14, legally questionable, but nobody asked questions in the Delta. He knew how to coax an overloaded truck up a muddy hill, how to nurse a blown gasket for 50 more miles, how to read road vibrations through the steering wheel like Braille. When his draft notice came in February 1943, Jimmy assumed he'd end up in the infantry like everyone else. Instead, the Army looked at his background and assigned him to the 3896th Quartermaster Truck Company. "Do you know trucks?" the recruiter said. "We need drivers." What the recruiter didn't mention was that the Quartermaster Corps was where the Army sent most of its black soldiers. 95% of quartermasters were segregated units. Combat roles for white soldiers. Supply roles for everyone else. Jimmy didn't complain. He figured hauling supplies beat getting shot at. He was 5'7", weighed 140 pounds soaking wet, and had a habit of humming church hymns when he drove, something his mother had done. That detail would save his life more than once when the humming kept him awake past the point where his body wanted to shut down. By August 1944, Jimmy had been in France for 11 weeks. D-Day had been June 6th. The breakout from Normandy happened in late July. Now, Patton's Third Army and Montgomery's forces were racing east so fast they'd outrun their logistics. The problem was simple and catastrophic. The Allied advance was happening faster than anyone had planned. Between August 1st and August 25, 1944, American forces pushed 250 kilometers inland. The original invasion plan assumed it would take 90 days to reach that position. They did it in 80 days. Sounds like good news. It wasn't. Every gallon of gasoline, every artillery shell, every can of rations still had to come from the beaches of Normandy. The French rail system, bombed to rubble by Allied air forces before D-Day to prevent German reinforcements, was useless. The Germans, retreating, destroyed what little infrastructure remained. There were no pipelines, no functioning ports closer than Cherbourg, 400 kilometers behind the front lines. The math was brutal. Patton's Third Army alone consumed 400 Zeusozeron gallons of gasoline per day. Each Sherman tank got 6 miles per gallon. The front was moving faster than the fuel. On August 28th, elements of the 4th Armored Division, spearhead of Patton's advance, ran completely dry 15 kilometers outside of Reims. Tanks stopped. Trucks stopped. An entire mechanized army, the most powerful offensive force ever assembled, immobilized because their gas tanks were empty. That same day, Corporal Deshawn Morrison from Jimmy's company died on Route Nationale 13. Morrison was from Seattle. He and Jimmy had become friends during the crossing from England. Morrison always talked about opening a garage after the war. Morrison and Rucard's Auto Repair 50-50 split. They'd shaken hands on it the night before embarkation. Morrison said Seattle was beautiful, said the rain was nothing compared to Mississippi humidity, said they'd make good money fixing the cars of all those Boeing workers. August 28th, Morrison was driving his 14th consecutive shift, 19 hours behind the wheel. He fell asleep at 05:20 hours just outside Drew. His truck drifted left, crossed the center line into oncoming traffic, head-on collision with another Red Ball truck hauling ammunition. Both drivers died instantly. The ammunition didn't detonate, small mercy. They buried Morrison in a temporary cemetery outside Sainte-Mère-Église. He was 23 years old. Jimmy found out 6 hours later when he returned to the staging area at Saint-Lô. A lieutenant he'd never seen before just said, "Morrison's gone. Accident. You're up again in 4 hours." No memorial, no pause, just, "You're up again in 4 hours." Between August 25 and September 15, 1944, 17 drivers from the Red Ball Express died. 11 from accidents caused by fatigue, 4 from vehicles' mechanical failures at speed, 2 from Allied aircraft that didn't recognize the convoys and strafed them by mistake. None of these deaths appear in official casualty statistics. They weren't combat losses. They were logistics. The pattern was identical. Overworked drivers, impossible schedules, vehicles pushed beyond mechanical limits, roads that became parking lots of broken trucks. Every day, somewhere on the 700-kilometer loop between Normandia and the front, another driver died the same way Morrison had. Asleep at the wheel, too exhausted to notice the road curving, too tired to react when the vehicle drifted. The Army's official response was to post signs along the Red Ball routes. "Stay alert. Stay alive." As if willpower could overcome 48 hours without sleep. But Jimmy Rucard noticed something nobody else had. Or maybe others noticed and didn't care. Maybe he was just the first one desperate enough to try something about it. It was September 2nd, 1944. Jimmy had just completed another 20-hour haul. He was sitting in his truck at the Saint-Lô staging area, too exhausted to walk the 100 yards to the tent where he was supposed to sleep for 4 hours before the next shift. His hands were shaking from fatigue. His vision kept blurring. He'd been humming hymns for the last 3 hours just to stay conscious. He looked around the staging area. Hundreds of GMC trucks, all identical, all being loaded by sweating quartermasters working under floodlights. And he noticed something. The loading crews were exhausted too. It took them 47 minutes on average to load a truck with 5,000 pounds of supplies, 47 minutes of manhandling jerry cans, ammunition crates, ration boxes. Then the driver would leave, drive 20 hours round trip, return, and the process would start over. Every minute spent loading was a minute the driver wasn't sleeping. Jimmy had grown up watching his father's trucking company. The old man had a rule: never waste time loading if you can load while you move. In Mississippi, they'd use rolling loads, prepping the next truck's cargo while the previous truck was still on the road. When Truck A returned, Truck B's load was already staged and secured on pallets. Transfer time 12 minutes instead of 47. The Army wasn't doing that. Every truck was being loaded from scratch, individually, manually, while drivers waited and burned through their precious rest time. Jimmy did the math in his head, running on fumes and desperation. 47 minutes per load, 6 loads per truck per day. Times 6, 0 trucks. That was 282 0 man-hours wasted per day on loading time. Time that could be sleeping time. Sleep that would prevent accidents. Accidents like the one that killed Morrison. But here's the problem. Suggesting a new loading system would mean going through official channels. Submitting a proposal to a captain who didn't know him, who might be offended that an enlisted black driver was trying to tell officers how to run logistics. It would mean paperwork, meetings, approvals. It would mean waiting, and drivers were dying now. So at 02:30 hours on September 3rd, Jimmy did something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He approached Sergeant William Hayes, the senior NCO running the Saint-Lô staging area. Hayes was white from Kansas and had a reputation for caring more about getting the job done than about regulations. Jimmy had never spoken to him directly before. "Sergeant, I got an idea that'll save us 35 minutes per load." Hayes looked at him with the exhausted irritation of a man who'd heard 1,000 stupid ideas from enlisted men trying to get out of work. "This better be good. Private?" Jimmy explained the rolling load system, explained how his father's company did it, explained how they could pre-stage tomorrow's loads tonight, use the loading crew's downtime more efficiently, cut the load time to under 15 minutes per truck. Hayes stared at him for a long moment. "You know how much red tape that would require? Changing the whole loading protocol. I'd need to get approval from battalion, division, maybe higher." "Yes, Sergeant." "And you know what they'd say? They'd say the system works fine. They'd say if it ain't broke, don't fix it." "Yes, Sergeant." Hayes was quiet. Then, "Morrison was your friend." "Yes, Sergeant." Another pause. Then Hayes did something remarkable. "I didn't hear this from you. You don't talk about this. If anyone asks, this was my idea. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Be here at 400. Bring anyone from your company who's not on the road. We're gonna run a test." That morning, September 3rd, at 400 hours, Jimmy and 11 other drivers from the 3896th Quartermaster Truck Company reported to the staging area. Hayes had already pulled together a loading crew, 20 men who were supposed to be off shift. Here's what they did. First, they measured everything. Hayes was methodical. He timed the standard loading procedure for 5 trucks: 44 minutes, 51 minutes, 49 minutes, 43 minutes, 50 minutes. Average, 47, 4 minutes. Then they tried Jimmy's system. They pre-staged the cargo on wooden pallets, 1 pallet per truckload, 5 loads prepared in advance. They organized by weight and cargo type: jerry cans on bottom, ammunition crates in middle, ration boxes on top. They used a forklift, technically assigned to a different unit, technically borrowed without authorization, to position the pallets. When the truck pulled up, the loading crew didn't hand-carry individual items. They slid the entire pallet load into the truck bed using rollers made from spare axles. 4 men, 1 pallet, into the truck, secure with cargo straps. Done. First truck, 18 minutes. Second truck, 14 minutes. Third truck, 12 minutes. By the 5th truck, they had it down to 11 minutes. Hayes stood there with a stopwatch and a clipboard, running the numbers. Then he looked at Jimmy and said something that would be repeated across every Red Bull staging area within 2 weeks. This might actually work, but they couldn't implement it officially, not yet. Hayes explained the reality. "If I submit this up the chain, it'll take 6 weeks to get approved. 6 weeks of meetings and memos. Meanwhile, drivers keep dying." "So what do we do, Sergeant?" Hayes smiled, a tired, slightly criminal smile. "We don't ask permission, we just do it. Tonight we prep tomorrow's loads. Tomorrow we run your system. If anyone asks, we're experimenting with efficiency improvements. If it works, we keep doing it. If brass notices and complains, I take the heat. And if it doesn't work, then we go back to the old way and I get demoted. But Morrison's still dead either way, so we might as well try." September 4th, 1944. Jimmy's company ran the rolling load system for their entire shift. Every truck that came through St. Lo's staging area got loaded in under 15 minutes. Drivers got an extra 30 minutes of sleep per cycle. It doesn't sound like much. 30 minutes. But across 24-hour shifts, it accumulated. The results were immediate and measurable. Before rolling loads, average turnaround time per truck, unload at front, return to staging area, reload, depart again, was 23 hours and 14 minutes. After rolling loads, average turnaround time dropped to 22 hours and 41 minutes. 33 minutes saved per cycle. Over 6 cycles per week per truck, that was 198 minutes. 3 hours and 18 minutes of additional rest per driver per week. More importantly, accidents dropped. The 3896th Quartermaster Truck Company went from 2 accidents in the previous 5 days to 0 accidents in the next 7 days. Word spread fast, not through official channels, through the drivers themselves. September 6th. A driver from the 3638th Quartermaster Truck Company, different unit, different staging area, saw the rolling load system at St. Lo and asked Hayes how it worked. Hayes explained. 2 days later, the 36th 38th was running the same system at their area in Alençon. September 10th, a white lieutenant from the 129th Quartermaster Battalion showed up at Saint-Lô unannounced. He'd heard rumors about unauthorized protocol modifications. Hayes thought he was about to be court-martialed. Instead, the lieutenant said, "Show me how you're doing this." Hayes and Jimmy demonstrated the rolling load system. The lieutenant watched 3 complete cycles. Then he pulled out a notebook and started taking detailed notes. "This is brilliant," the lieutenant said. "Why the hell isn't everyone doing this?" "Because it's not in the manual, sir," Hayes said carefully. "Fuck the manual. I'm implementing this at every staging area in my battalion by tomorrow. Who came up with it?" Hayes hesitated. If he took credit, he'd get recognition, but Jimmy would get nothing. If he credited Jimmy, there was a chance the lieutenant would dismiss it, because a black enlisted man's idea couldn't possibly be valuable. Hayes made his choice. "Private Rucard here came up with the concept, sir. I helped implement it." The lieutenant looked at Jimmy, really looked at him maybe for the first time. "Private, you just saved the army about 10,000 man-hours per week. I don't have the authority to give you a commendation, but I can damn well make sure this spreads." By September 15, 1944, the rolling load system was being used at 12 Red Ball Express staging areas across Normandy. It wasn't official. There were no orders, no written doctrine, no field manual updates. It just spread, sergeant to sergeant, driver to driver, unit to unit. The numbers told the story. Between August 25 and September 7th, before rolling loads widespread, Red Ball Express moved 11,900 tons of supplies per day with 17 driver fatalities. Between September 8 and September 30th, after rolling loads widespread, Red Ball Express moved 13,100 tons of supplies per day with 4 driver fatalities, 10% increase in throughput, 76% decrease in deaths. The German perspective on all of this is fascinating and tragic. In early September 1944, German intelligence officers analyzing Allied logistics were baffled. They'd calculated correctly that the Allies couldn't possibly sustain their advance. The math was simple. Destroyed rail infrastructure plus 400-kilometer supply lines, plus exponentially increasing fuel consumption, should have halted the Allied armies by late August. But it didn't happen. A captured Wehrmacht logistics report from September 12, 1944, obtained by Allied intelligence, included this passage. "Enemy supply system operates at efficiency level inexplicable by conventional military logistics doctrine. Estimated Allied transport capacity insufficient for observed consumption rates. Recommend immediate investigation of unknown supply methodology." The Germans couldn't figure it out because they were thinking in terms of trains and traditional logistics. The idea of 6 0 trucks in continuous operation, running 24-hour cycles on dedicated roads, was outside their framework. The German army still moved 80% of its supplies by horse and rail. Motorized logistics at the Red Bull scale was unprecedented. By late September, German commanders knew what was coming. The logistics were solved. The advance would continue. There would be no operational pause, no chance to consolidate defensive lines. Wehrmacht General Günther Blumentritt wrote in his diary, "We cannot match their supply system. We face an enemy who can feed his tanks faster than we can build new ones." Here's what the Red Ball Express actually accomplished between August 25 and November 16, 1944. Total tonnage delivered, 412, 193 tons. That's gasoline, ammunition, rations, medical supplies, spare parts, engineering equipment, everything an advancing army needs. Daily average 12,500 tons per day in constant operation. For context, the entire German railway system in occupied France, even before Allied bombing, could move about 50,000 tons per week. The Red Ball Express, using simple trucks and exhausted drivers, was moving 87,500 tons per week. That's 75% more than the Germans' entire rail network. The Reichsbahn, the German state railway, was still considered one of the most efficient logistics systems in the world. It had moved entire armies across Europe. And here's the stunning reality. A convoy of American trucks improvised in 2 weeks, driven mostly by segregated black soldiers, was outperforming it by a massive margin. Eisenhower understood what this meant. In a letter to General George Marshall on September 20th, 1944, he wrote, "The success of Red Ball has proven more decisive than air superiority or armored tactics. Wars are won by logistics, not courage. But here's the part of the story that should outrage you. Private First Class James Ruckard received no commendation for the rolling load system. No medal, no official recognition, no mention in unit citations. Sergeant Hayes was quietly credited within his battalion, but nothing went on his permanent record. The rolling load system itself was never officially adopted as Army doctrine during the war. It was filed under Field Expedient Solutions, meaning it worked, but wasn't worth documenting properly. After the war, no military logistics manual mentioned it. No staff college taught it. The official Army history of Red Ball Express, published in 1950, contains 247 pages. The rolling load system gets 4 sentences in a footnote on page 183. Jimmy Ruckard's name doesn't appear at all. When the war ended, Jimmy went home to Clarksdale. He was 23 years old. He'd driven an estimated 140,000 kilometers during his service, enough to circle the Earth 3.5 times. His discharge papers listed his occupation as motor transport operator and included exactly 0 awards or decorations. He went back to work at his father's trucking company. He married a woman named Clara Jenkins in 1947. They had 4 children. He coached Little League Baseball. He taught Sunday school at Mount Olive Baptist Church. He drove trucks for 40 years, local routes, timber and cotton, just like before the war. He rarely talked about France. When people asked if he'd seen combat, he'd say, "I drove supplies, nothing exciting." In 1989, a historian named Dr. David Colley was researching a book on Red Ball Express. He was interviewing veterans, trying to understand why the system had worked so well. Someone mentioned that the loading procedures had improved dramatically around early September 1944. Colley dug into unit records and found Sergeant Hayes's name mentioned in a couple of after-action reports. Hayes had died in 1971, but Colley tracked down Hayes's widow, who had a box of her husband's papers. In that box was a letter Hayes had written to his brother in October 1944. The letter mentioned a sharp kid named Ruckard from Mississippi who figured out how to load trucks twice as fast. Colley found Jimmy in Clarksdale in 1990. Jimmy was 68 years old by then, still driving trucks part-time. Colley interviewed him for 3 hours. Jimmy described the rolling load system in detail, explained how it worked, explained why he'd thought of it. At the end of the interview, Colley asked, "Do you realize your idea probably saved hundreds of lives?" Jimmy thought about it. "I just wanted to sleep more, and I didn't want anyone else to die like Morrison." Colley's book, Decision at Strasbourg, published in 1991, includes a full chapter on the rolling load system. Jimmy's name appears 17 times. The book sold 300-400 copies, mostly to military historians and logistics specialists. James Ruckard died on February 3, 2003, at age 81. The obituary in the Clarksdale Press Register was 4 sentences long. James Ruckard, longtime resident and truck driver, died Tuesday. He is survived by his wife Clara, 4 children and 9 grandchildren. He served in World War II. Funeral Friday at Mount Olive Baptist Church. No mention of Red Ball Express, no mention of the rolling load system. No mention that his idea helped deliver 412, 193 tons of supplies that kept the Allied advance moving, shortened the war in Europe by weeks, possibly months, and saved thousands of lives. There's a small museum in Bastogne, Belgium, dedicated to logistics units in World War II. In one corner, there's a display about Red Ball Express. It includes a photograph of a GMC-2, 5-ton truck, a map showing the routes, and a placard with statistics. At the bottom, in small text, there's a single sentence. Improved loading procedures in September 1944 increased efficiency significantly. That's it. That's the memorial. The real innovation in war isn't always dramatic. It's not always Overlord or Omaha Beach or Bastogne. Sometimes it's a tired kid from Mississippi who figured out how to load a truck faster because he didn't want his friend's death to be meaningless. Sometimes it's a sergeant who broke the rules because saving lives mattered more than following procedure. The Red Ball Express moved more supplies in one day than the German railway system moved in a week, not because of better technology or superior resources, but because ordinary soldiers solved problems nobody else had bothered to think about. And almost nobody remembers their names. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. We're committed to bringing you the forgotten stories of World War II, the ones that don't make it into textbooks. And leave a comment below. Are you a veteran? Did someone in your family serve? Do you know other stories like this one that deserve to be remembered? Thank you for keeping these memories alive. Thanks for making sure that people like Jimmy Ruckard, who gave everything and asked for nothing, aren't completely forgotten.